Good afternoon. Today I'm going to review the Nikon F camera. The review will be in two parts. The first part is why you would want to buy such a camera, and the second part is all the little bits and pieces that are unique to this camera or are different to other Nikon cameras that came after it. This is a milestone camera. There are four reasons for that. The first is that the mirror returned automatically. The second is that the aperture was automatic. Third, the camera is extremely robust and has stopped bullets, saving at least one photographer's life. Fourth, when it arrived, it came with lenses from as wide as a 21mm ultra, what was then called an ultra-wide lens, all the way through to up to 1000mm of telephoto in a reflex model. So it was a complete system when it arrived. Because 860,000 of these were made, they're not particularly expensive for a landmark camera, and because they're built like a tank, they're somewhat weighty. Because they're so well made, you'll invariably find one that still works. They absolutely have to be trashed before they'll stop working. And when it arrived, it spelt the end of the dominance of rangefinder cameras in 35mm. That's why you'd want to buy one of these. If you're a camera collector, it has a lot of history behind it. I have met a camera collector who said that they wouldn't buy one, mainly because the back of the camera comes off completely. The Nikon F represents a development of the Nikon rangefinder, the SP model, and the SP model was modeled after the Zeiss Contax II. Leica, of course, was in a deadly battle with the Zeiss Contax, and so this camera you can think of as the grandchild of the Zeiss Contax, ended the dominance of the Leica rangefinder. When you look at the top plate of this camera, it looks like any other single lens reflex camera you've seen, and it's just like every other Nikon camera except for one thing. The shutter button is set back. The reason for this is that, as I said before, this is a basic reworking of the rangefinder Nikon SP, and in this space here it had a little wheel which you could use to focus the camera. The ring over here, you can see it can point at either an A or an R, and you can twist this ring. There's an indent on the ring, and it can point to the A or the R. R for reverse, A for advance. And so to rewind the film, you have to have that notch pointing at the R, and to wind on, you need to have it pointed to the A. This is the shutter speed dial. This is a photomic head, an FTN, and this is the rewind knob. As you can see, there's no hot shoe. The hot shoe fits on top with these two metal grooves. This place also holds an accessory finder. So if you fit in a 21mm lens, you have to flip up the mirror before you can put in the lens, and then you can't look through the eyepiece anymore. You have to use an accessory finder on the side. I don't have an accessory finder, but that's what that place is for. Either the hot shoe or an accessory finder. This is the release. You press this button to take the exposure. To remove the lens, you press this button and you turn, and off comes the lens. To put the lens back on again, because this is a photomic finder, your black dot has to be pointed at F 5.6. Then you line up the white dot with the black dot, and then you wiggle it backwards and forwards. And you can see the little rabbit ears have a little rod in between them. The rod is associated with the meter, and you have to tell the meter what lens you have by going all the way to one side and then all the way back to the other side. I believe it's called the Nikon shuffle. To lock up the mirror, we'll take the lens out again. This over here is a little black dot on the body, and there's a red dot on the button itself, and you have to turn them so that they line up. So we'll just do that. And now when we wind on and take the shot, you see the mirror disappears. So we can take many more shots. If we put a motorized back on the side on the camera, we can shoot at 4 frames per second. The mirror stays in a lockup position, and you can then shoot as many pictures as you like. But when you're done, once you've exposed, you can then move this back, and your mirror returns. Here's the connector for the flash. Here's the button for the depth of field preview. The manual says do not use the depth of field preview and take a photograph at the same time with the shutter in T or time. Now, anybody who can do that all at the same time, they deserve your admiration, but they could damage the camera. Another thing that's different on this compared to others is if you have the camera in T, that means time. Once you activate the shutter will stay open as long as you like. To make it to stop, you turn the shutter button, and that ends the exposure. Flash sync is indicated with the red, so flash sync is at 1/60th of a second. Green means you're going faster than that, so you shouldn't see a lot of problems hand holding the camera. And after that, they're in white. Here are a couple of things that differ between this Nikon and younger Nikons. The shutter button doesn't depress if it's not wound on. If I wind it on, then the shutter button depresses. In subsequent Nikon cameras, the shutter button allows you to screw in a cable release, such as this. To make multiple exposures, other Nikon cameras have a little lever that you pull. This does it differently. See that red dot on the shutter button? Well, first of all, you put the camera into reverse, so you shift this to R. Then you rewind the film until this dot gets back to the same place as before. This allows you to do double exposures on several frames. Just wind it back. This thing goes around 1, 2, 3, as many as you like, and then you put the camera back into forward or advance. You wind on, and you start taking photographs again. That's very useful. There are a couple of indicators that you set yourself. These are not automatically derived from the film itself, but they help you to remember what film you've got in the camera, particularly if you haven't used the camera for a while. Let's hope that never happens. Over here you set whether the roll of film has 36 exposures or 20 exposures. And over here you set the speed of the film, and you use the silver mark to indicate that it's black and white, and the red mark to indicate if it's color. You do have to remember what film you've got, because as you can imagine, if you've forgotten whether it's color or black and white, you're not quite sure what the speed of the film is, but it's there just in case. This camera has a very distinctive look. It looks a bit like Gumby, if you're familiar with a green plasticine cartoon character from the 1990s. It's immediately recognizable. I've had people come up to me and say, "Oh, is that a Nikon F?" Because of the way it looks, this is the Pentaprism that I would want on it. This button, if you press it, it allows you to remove the Pentaprism. However, on this camera, I've tried to remove the Pentaprism and it doesn't work. You can make it click, but the Pentaprism won't come off. To open the back, you twist that and then the entire back comes off. This allows you to put a special back on, and a special motorized back. The shutter is a horizontal titanium foil. It's incredibly reliable. You should be able to take 500,000 or more photographs, and if you're using film, you're not going to take 500,000 shots. To close, so this is the pressure plate bit over here. I think you don't want to slide that up against the film or anything, so I tend to close this by putting it in my hands like this and putting it like so, and then clicking it together, and then just turning that. Another way in which it differs is on the light seals. If you look closely, you'll see there's no foam. No foam on the camera, no foam on the back. This is like rangefinders of old, or Leicas of today, where the edge is so deep and so well machined that the camera is light tight without the need for foam. This means the camera can last a lot longer before you have to replace the foam, because you don't have any foam to replace. So there are a couple of other tricks to loading this film, and I'm going to try to load the camera holding it up here, which is going to be a bit clumsy, but we'll try anyway. The second thing is I'm going to reload film which I've partly used before. So I'm going to put the lens cap on. I'm going to put the lens cap on so that it doesn't fog any of the exposures I've already made. Okay, here goes. Now, you can see that when you take the back off, there's no bottom to the chamber, only the top part, and this doesn't move up or down. And the second thing, this thing has a slit, but unlike modern Nikon cameras, it doesn't have a little spur. The spur fits into the perforations on the film, but in this camera you just feed the leader through the slit. And when I put the film in, I'm going to make sure that 2 perforations from the film sit onto these 2 notches on the camera. Okay, here goes. I pull this out to about there. Now, the camera is going to disappear and appear, but you just have to figure, I'm going to put this between that slot there. Okay, you can see it's through. and then I'm going to, so it's kind of wound on, but not fully wound on. I just want those perforations to be engaged with the drive. Okay, now I'm going to put the back on. And we just now, and I'm just going to shoot this until I get to 11 on the dial, because that's where I was before. Actually, I might just show you, and you can be able to see the things move. I might just show you what happens if you want to do a multiple exposure. Nothing there. Okay. So now we turn it backwards. So it's now in the reverse position. And then we start turning. You can see the little red dot moving about. To where it was before. And now we've turned it to advance. And there we have it. Done. So let's talk about the viewfinder. It gives you 100% coverage, and it's at 80% of real life. The eyepiece is -1 diopters, which works for most people. The ground glass is pre-1985, which means you can use this camera with a fast lens and get accurate focus on the ground glass, so you're not really dependent upon the split prism. The viewfinder is quite large, but it's not quite high eye point. When you're using this camera, people will come up to you to talk about the camera, and quite often you can get their portrait. Like all single lens reflex cameras, you have full control of the exposure. There are only 3 things that you need to consider. The first is the shutter speed. The second is the aperture, how wide the aperture is set. And the third is the speed of the film. You have all of the controls you need. Just remember those 3 things, and you can adjust it, and you can take your pictures as you like. Exposure compensation, just open up the aperture a little bit, or close it a little bit, or adjust the shutter speed. It's all in your own hands. For an SLR, it's not the most discreet camera, but it's quite discreet. Compared to my Nikon FM2, the sound of the shutter is sort of chunk. Because it's lower frequency, it doesn't scare people so much. When you wind on, it's a bit like a can of beer or soda being opened. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening, and until next time, goodbye.